Hey guys, it's Mr. Monteiro. I hope that you are all doing very well at this time, in spite of everything that's going on in the world. Speaking of which, we are going to talk today about your 1984 final essays. So I basically just wanted to run through all of the prompts that you have to choose from and talk about some potential directions that you could take those, just to help you, get your brains flowing a little bit and thinking about what you should be writing about. Now, I didn't give you a whole lot of direction with this. I will totally admit that. This is basically an English 3 essay versus the English 2 essay. English 2, I'm giving them a lot of structure with how to write it. You guys don't have so much structure, though. You're basically on your own to figure that out. But of course, we've written a whole lot this year, and we've worked on our essay structures, so you should be okay with that. Classic 5 paragraphs, introduction, 3 body paragraphs, which should match your thesis statement, and then slap a conclusion on that bad boy, and we're good to go, right? So let's go ahead and read through all of these topics, and we will talk about them together. I'll talk about the book a little bit to help you understand the end of part 2 and part 3, which you've read on your own, hopefully. So, of course, you won't necessarily have the access to the book to help you write this, but there are some ways you can reach it online if you're unaware of that. Literally, you can just do a Google search here for 1984 online book. And there you go. You've got Planet ebook. You've got georgeorwell.org. That's where I was getting your books from. So you can use those to help you cite evidence if you feel so inclined. But I won't be so stringent on that, or I won't be as strict about it, because I understand, of course, the circumstances in which we are writing. Now, the good news is, even if you didn't quite understand the end of the book, or you had some trouble reading it on your own, a lot of these essays are possible to write without having finished the book. Of course, the ending is very important for it, in my opinion, but you can get by with what we talked about in class, and you'll be all right. So let's talk about these. First one, Eric Fromm in the afterword in the Signet Classic Edition of 1984 states, George Orwell's 1984 is the expression of a mood, and it is a warning. The mood it expresses is that of near despair about the future of man, and the warning is that unless the course of history changes, men all over the world will lose their most human qualities, will become soulless automatons, and will not even be aware of it. So what specifically is this warning about? Now, a soulless automaton, that's basically meaning a robot, someone who goes through the motions of their life but isn't necessarily thinking about it, isn't displaying like human emotion and those kind of things that we associate with what it means to be human. Now, one thing you might write about for this is kind of like what Muhammad Ali talked about in class, which was the fact that the party had kind of split humans into their base elements in two, between the proles and the party. So with the party, you had humans still expressing some amount of intellectual capability, where they were capable of thinking and feeling some things, whereas with the proles they had only freedom, right? So this is something you could talk about and bring up in your essays as the ways in which humans are kind of being split in our current lives, if you wanted to cite the book. Now, in terms of what's happening in real life that matches that, I'm sure that you could think of a million examples, right? We talked a lot in class about cell phones and how so robotically, we tend to just scroll and scroll and scroll and look at that Instagram feed or whatever without even thinking about it. To me, that is the definition of being a soulless automaton. So something to think about. Now, number 2, in 1984, the party is able to generate enthusiasm for war, no matter the enemy or local conditions. What methods does it use to build support for the war, and how do the citizens respond? What does this suggest about human behavior and human nature in general? Now, on this one, there's a lot that you can talk about. I think what I would probably focus on would be the 2 minutes hate. So every single day, you focus on hating the enemy, Goldstein in this case, as much as you possibly can. You just release that hateful energy, and it gets the citizens passionate. It gets them hating Goldstein so much that they can't even contain it, right? And that naturally sparks enthusiasm for war. If Goldstein is so evil that you hate him every single day and every moment of your life, well, then you've got to fight against him in some way. And the party does a good job of manipulating its people to focus that hatred towards East Asia and Eurasia as they need to. Remember, whoever that is happens to change all the time. Now, what does that suggest about human behavior? I would think it suggests that humans are susceptible to being manipulated. The party does a very good job of it. They can change the enemy like that in the blink of an eye, right? And they do it by manipulating people's emotions, by getting them so hateful that they don't discern, they don't think about who the enemy really is. And unfortunately, we can see that a lot happening in America today. There are a lot of really racist, horrible people who just hate blindly, and they get manipulated into doing so by leaders who tell them, "Hey, all of your problems, those come from, for example, immigrants, illegal immigrants." People hate immigrants blindly sometimes because they've been whipped into a frenzy by people like that, right? All right, number 3, something we talked about a lot. How is Julia characterized? In what ways is she different from Winston? What are her major interests and concerns? Why is she willing to rebel against the party? We talked about this extensively in class, and it was the subject of our Socratic dialogue, if you remember. With Julia, she is a rebel like Winston, but she doesn't really care so much about changing society. She cares more so about getting hers, getting pleasure for herself, but not so much about trying to change things. She doesn't think it's really possible to change the party or to change the course of humanity at all. So, as Winston says in a very wonderful line, a very clever line, "You're only a rebel from the waist down." And I'm sure that you know what that means. So that, honestly, if I were writing a paper based on what we talked about in class, that would definitely be a prompt I would gravitate toward. Number 4, one of the most frightening aspects of 1984 is newspeak, the systematic deterioration of language as a medium of truth. Example, war is peace, freedom is slavery. Why do the people in the novel adapt or accept these so-called truths? How are they used as tools to manipulate opinion and reinforce the total dominance of the state? And can you find examples in our own day of the corruption of language as a dependable reflection of reality? Whew, so that's a loaded one. Pretty difficult. Now, with this prompt, the way that what you should be thinking about are the ways that people talk with Newspeak. If you remember, they simplified the language, and we talked a lot about that in class. So instead of saying that something is wonderful, you might say that it's double plus good. And really, double plus good is the only way that you could express in this new world of the party that something is better than good. Whereas in our language, we have wonderful, fantastic, amazing, all of these different words with their shades of meaning. And as we talked about in class, by removing those words, by limiting what humans say, you eventually limit their tools for expressing themselves, and therefore their tools for thinking. Because that's what language is. It's your tool for thinking and then expressing a thought or an emotion. So by the party doing this, they are really limiting the ability of their citizens to rise against them and even to figure out what the truth is, because language is so basic that you can't discern little tiny differences, little nuances in meaning. Examples in our own day, I'm sure that you can think of many memes, for example. They're like a stripping down of language in some ways.